Alright, so there's not really any rules to recording, but I try not to use last names simply for the sake of your own privacy. Ooh. What should I do? It's 4. Which probably by Friday will be. You guys will have enough of me for Friday. We'll be doing test questions and everything, so menu. How do I do this?
Is there a security key for the wireless?
Yeah, there is.
No rush.
I just don't know what it is. I'm gonna copy these files off here real quick too. So, alright, so let's see if I can do this. Let's do wireless settings first. Okay, can you see it?
Go ahead.
It's well, it's Insight123 with a capital I. And that should probably help you guys. Is that better? Much better, right?
Yes.
Can you see that?
Yes.
Can you guys read Insight123?
Yep.
Yeah.
Well, if you can read that, then we should be fine. So it's easier, there's some notes in here. So some of the notes I want to highlight, so I try to actually use this view when I'm scrolling through this. That way I can let's see. That's a little small. Can you guys see that? Is that okay?
Yeah.
Seven gigs. First model. Welcome to Tuesday.
Feels like Monday.
How's the holidays?
Busy.
Good. You guys want lights on or off?
Off is fine with me.
Alright. Alright, so let's see what we got. Alright, so what you have in your binder is basically a printed out copy of the slides with the notes, but I did it single paged. And
attempt to give you plenty of room to write notes and everything else. In some cases, I'm just gonna tell you what I want you to highlight, because if you come back to it, or you wanna flip through it, it'll respark a train of thought. So sometimes I will say, hey, write this down, right? So you can come back to it later. I tend to go a little bit overboard on this certification compared to others, because in this case, more can't hurt you. Rather to have the in-depth, all the inside stuff that you possibly can for this. So in an attempt to really, I guess, over-prepare, but we'll gauge that as we're going. So basically, this is the CAP certification. I'm not into reading slides, so I'm not a slide reader at all, simply because I don't really read too well. But I either read and it sounds good and I don't comprehend, or I read to comprehend and it doesn't sound well. So I'm not really a reader in that sense. Are you guys familiar with the cone of learning? The cone of learning was basically a study by Edgar Dale in 1969. And this is kind of like, I guess, what I build my classroom instruction on. And what I find is that most people don't even know how to learn, or they don't realize what they're doing when they're learning. And so you have basically two different types. You have active learning and you have passive learning. Passive learning is typically what we call, it's a very technical term, it's called it sucks, right? If, in other words, if I'm reading to you, you're only going to remember 10% of what you read after about 2 weeks. That's why a 2-week period is critical in taking these certifications. So if you were to just read this whole book, you remember about 10% of it, or about 1,000 slides, you remember about 100 of them. Not really too effective, if you ask me. If you were to just listen to me all week long, you would be very, very bored, and you'd only remember 20% of it. You'd remember 30% after 2 weeks if you just watch what I do all week. And if you start combining that, you get up towards the 50%, but still not enough to pass. I try to focus on active learning, which is you remember 70% of what you say. So that means realistically, you guys need to speak all of this back to me, which is participate in the discussion. The way that I run the discussions, or I talk about real world experience, talk about what I've done, what you've done, and then I plug in the material so you can relate it to something you know. It's a lot easier to learn, relate something to something that you know, as opposed to trying to basically learn it from scratch. So I don't expect you to give a talk, but you can participate in the discussion. That'll be just fine. Or my favorite, 90% of what you guys do, and this would be simulating a real thing. That would be your real world experience. And participating. So the closer we can get to that, the more effective this class ultimately becomes. What cracks me up about this is, people have bachelor's degrees, master's degrees, PhDs, and they've never heard about this. And I've always scratched my head at that. And it's like, how can you have a PhD? You basically went through the whole education system and you never once, looked at, what's the best way to learn. Some people can read a book and they can ace stuff. Other people actually need to do it. So I'm a big believer of monkey see, monkey do, basically. So you'll pick up on my style here, because I guess my motivation to teach these classes is I went to Johns Hopkins University and engineering night school, and I had some of the same instructors my dad had. And he went there, 20 years before I did. And they were horrible. All they did was basically read out of the book. And I just thought to myself, man, how can this person still have a job? I mean, it was beyond what we would refer to as tenure. And I'm sure there's other great instructors at Johns Hopkins. Some of the ones kind of rubbed me the wrong way. So I never wanted anybody to say, Leo, I can't believe that guy's still in business, have those same thoughts that I had. So when it comes down to this, it should be a very, very effective class. All right. Basically, we're going to look at all FSMA stuff. We'll look at the Federal Information Processing Standard. Many of the NIST special publications, you not only really should know them by number. If you start by just focusing on the numbers, their numbers aren't going to mean anything to you because there's hundreds of them, and I don't remember the numbers to all of them. But for several of those, it will make sense to actually know the numbers. And then, of course, anything from the Office of Management budget. And that's basically it, right? Alright. Now, some of the slides will actually be blank in the slide, but you'll have extra notes. That simply just made it easier for me, so I didn't have to have it crammed when it got printed out. Alright, so expectations and goals, right? Looking at FSMA compliance, being NIST, we're going to spend a lot of time in the risk management framework. We'll look at government laws, regulations, policies, directives, memoranda. Again, this is document after document after document. There is no fun digging in these documents. And I often tell people, if you have problems sleeping, read the documents. They will put you to sleep. They're not as bad as legal documents, but they're definitely that high-level lingo and that scripted stuff. So if you're good at interpreting that, maybe your advantage. I just assume that nobody else is.
You don't need to have copies of any of the documents, like the NIST or any of those.
No, but there's certain. What I do when it comes to referencing the documents is I want you guys to look them up. I want you guys to be able to find out where it is. I want you guys to know exactly where to look in the documents for the specific verbiage. So that does not mean, what that does mean is that, I don't want you to read the whole document. 80% of some of the documents, won't apply. But it's that 20% that you need to know exactly where to go to, where to focus in on, and so I'll show you exactly where it is. So you might make a lot of references to go to NIST 837, page 50 or something like that, and come up with a running list, and that would actually be a good place to take notes. And I will highlight stuff and actually quiz you guys on, what document did this, what document said that, and that helps us get a little bit more fluent with them. So I want to use the documents, but I don't want to memorize the documents by titles because, in my opinion, unless you want to be the Rain Man of accreditation, I don't really find that as useful as some of the other types of learning. Then you got FIPS, processing standards, and several of the NIST interagency reports. We'll look at those. All right, so basically, here's what we're going to do in this quick module. Probably get through about 2 modules today. The first one's relatively thin. The second one is a little bit of a beast. But I want to get through at least 1 or 2, and then I'll want to take at least 1 practice test every day. The practice test questions that I have are the ones that I've been using. I have about 250 questions, and if we do 50 chunks, it's not too bad. And I really want you guys to walk out of here Friday ready to pass this thing. That always seems what the learners want. They would just want to pass the exam. But my goal in the whole thing is to actually have you guys walk out of here, and I want you guys to be able to move mountains, because the odds of doing that without some serious motivation are stacked against you, in my opinion. In the world of IT, and especially security now, we're expected to do more with less, and you're going to have to move mountains. You're going to have to get people to make decisions. You're going to push accreditation packages out to people, and you're going to need to get that job done. And especially with the way business, if you will, naturally happens, the odds aren't always in your favor. Does that make sense? Do you agree?
Yes.
So I don't want to just produce people that have passed the test. I actually want to be able to, wish that I could work with you and say, you know what, this is someone that I could recommend or write a recommendation for. So, all right. So basically, a little bit about me, the exam, different training standards. The Cnss training standard is pretty important. Talk a little bit about this Federal IT Security Institute, and course outlines and materials and things like that. So, for me, basically, see LinkedIn. So if you were to Google me, you would find my LinkedIn profile. So basically I've gone to a couple of different colleges. I've got a bunch of certifications. And this is going to help you because I can, if you have any other certifications, I can tune into that frequency, if you will, and basically speak that language. So do you have any other certifications that I can perhaps leverage?
Oh, and I have a Security Plus.
Okay. And yeah.
Net Plus, Security Plus.
Okay, that's good to know.
Good to see.
Okay, good. All right, so those are basically your basic level certifications, basic security, basic networking. It's very, very important and foundational. And now what you're going to go into is the rabbit hole of accreditation packages, basically, and everything that relates to that. So basically, I'm a trainer in myself. That's pretty much my core. But some of my background, I've worked for, the park. Let's see, a little bit farther up. Let's see, I worked for Lockheed Martin at Centers for Medicaid and Medicare. I was an incident responder there. And a lot of the vulnerabilities, kind of more blue teaming, where you find vulnerabilities and then you work with people to get your stuff accredited.
Look, TikTok.
What's that?
I was looking at the IRS where he mentions the agency that he works for.
Well, I don't work for it, so we're gonna take.
No, it says,
Oh, do you?
down in,
Yeah.
it says it down in.
Do you know Trevor Nelson?
No.
He was at New Carrollton. It's been years since I worked at the IRS. When I worked at IRS.
I've been with him since 2007.
Okay, and I left there I think in 2005. So a little bit of crossover news there.
Trevor Nelson?
Yeah,
I know the
big
name.
guy.
Yeah, I know the name.
Yeah, great guy.
Because I worked there. I used to work for the IRS. Yeah. I left in 2000 because of the new season.
Okay. Great. Well, good. Well, we can speak that language then easily.
You know Irish, do you? Robert Irish.
Yeah, Robert Hart, yeah. So you have, I was basically an incident responder there, very, very technical oriented, and then I went to Lockheed Martin to basically start an incident response capability for them. Some of the other stuff that I've done, the Department of Labor, Department of State, I feel like I've been at most three-letter agencies at some point, either through a consulting capacity or a training capacity, or this industry is small enough that it's really hard not to bump into people, So, I can talk about myself all day long, but I won't. So if you have any questions, feel free to Google, LinkedIn me, Facebook me, Twitter me. I'm on all of those networks, so feel free to tune into that. All right, so let's go there. I always try to find quotes of people because it puts things in context. So only through, especially as you might get to the horse's mouth, like, what are people saying? So only through diligence and a well-trained workforce will we be able to adequately defend the nation's vital information resources. So it's this well-trained workforce piece that I really try to focus on and making people from regular employees to basically experts in their field. All right, so CAP. All right. This has everything to do with applying security controls, assessing security control, and then monitoring them. So in your own words, what is a control?
Controls are any kind of requirements or standards that you have to set on a application system or a system to meet either federal or local government guidelines.
Right. And we can also look at it from a risk point of view, right? You have threats, which are the keywords for threats or potentials, right? Potential bad stuff that happens out in the world. And then we have our systems, and they can or may be vulnerable. So we always try to reduce the vulnerability on our side proactively and put controls in place to basically reduce the likelihood or the risk of the likelihood of a threat actually taking advantage of a vulnerability. All right? So controls and countermeasures work very, very close together. And so basically, we're going to look at everything from a control point of view, right? Everything from categorizing them, and especially how the language of the document categorizes them and defines them. Most of this is going to apply to department, obviously DoD systems, but there are other people who also follow similar methodologies. There's the Cnss National Training Standard, and this is important because, well, first you got the DoD 8570, which basically says that continuing education for anybody who works on federal systems, they have to maintain their education. Then you have the training standard that says let's train people to a certain capacity. Let's make a standard. So what's a standard?
Standard is any formalized guidance.
Formalized guidance. Close. I don't like the word guidance.
Requirements.
More requirements than guidance. Guidance, I play a lot of synonym games. So when you have guidance or recommendations or suggestions, they're not binding in a sense, okay? So you don't have to follow guidance. I can say, I would like you to do something. I don't mean you have to do it, right? I'd like for you to make your bed every single day. I don't mean you have to, right? But if the standard is that we make the bed every single day, that means every day we make the bed, right? So that's something binding, something that's fixed in time and place. Some of the numbers that you'll constantly see, and these will become gray in the sense that, okay, who's going to remember 40, 11, 12, 13 by name? Unless you work with those documents or that language all the time, the numbers, which one was that again? So don't feel bad, look it up, all right? In the academic world, we want you to know that stuff because that's easy test questions. Hey, what is, 4012? Oh, that's senior systems manager, right? But in the real world, we have time to look that stuff up and reference it and, put together that documentation in our own little bubble, if you will. So don't feel bad, look the stuff up. You look it up enough times, eventually you'll get it, right? So this dates back to October about 2001, basically, because of the 9/11 attacks. So, hey, let's put the standards in place. Let's raise the bar, if you will. And that'll help us safeguard what goes on. All right, so some of the numbers here, you got 4012, senior system managers, then you got system administrators, system certifiers, and risk analysts. Why do you think these are labeled the way they are? What do you see here? Give me another name for what's on that slide. InfoSec professionals, managers, administrators, officers, certifier, and analysts. Specifically risk analysts. What are all these? These are all types of what? Begins with an R.
Roles and responsibilities.
Yeah, roles. Exactly. We want to break the training down to the role of the individual. So if you're an operator per se, or you're a manager, or you're a risk analyst, then we can tie everything back to the role of the individual. That's where the big picture is going. All right, so it's all tied to the role, then being certified in that role. In my opinion, what that does is if you're, let's say, a system manager, you may be certified as a system manager, but not as a risk analyst. I think what that does is that naturally mitigates the acting on the behalf of role. From one government role to another government role, it's easy to have somebody sit in somebody else's shoes and act on the behalf of. Well, when you define it and you certify the individual in that role, that limits the pool of that role. So you have to have somebody who's certified in that role to really get at least a good product. Right? So they're just breaking it down into roles and responsibilities in terms of an actual standard. Right? So for system managers, right? This comes from NIST 816, which is the training requirements. Not exactly a very exciting document to read. but it was the development of training as a first line of defense. So one of the things that I focus on a lot is the why. Why are we doing the things that we're doing? You know, let's question authority, if you will. And so what I see here is I see proactive versus reactive, right? If you want to focus on training, security awareness, and training from a proactive point of view, you can bring everybody up to speed ahead of time, and if you create a better product proactively, you get a better product when you have to react to things. And so one of the things that 4012 Status for Senior System Managers does, it basically establishes the minimum course content. Alright, so watch the roles. We're going to talk a lot about roles. Jim Wiggins is the director of the FITSE Institute, or FITSE.org, and it's something that you guys may want to consider. Those FITSE certifications map everything to the roles and responsibilities, and it's a little bit more in depth. And this is starting to take off, mostly because you're combining roles and responsibilities with all of the federal documents and being fluent with them, especially a lot of the NIST stuff. So the closer we get to the world of NIST, the more important FITSE becomes. And it's actually a certification, and they break things down into the role of the individual. So you can see you have your manager, designer, operator, auditor, etc., etc., etc. So think about this for a second. Here's your roles mapped to Cnss, which is your standard. So a standard for the actual role of the individual. That's going to become very, very important, especially the closer we get to NIST. So to help secure the nation's federal information systems by certifying the federal workforce members, understand and can apply the appropriate federal standards. So this has a lot to do with, hey, you are in a specific role, what documents do you use to get what functions done? Everything is mapped in a standard type of way. All right, so here it looks at the different, the roles, the manager, the designer, the operator, and the auditor, all focusing off of the federal body of knowledge. The domains that we're going to cover, several of the NIST publications, FIPS standard, very, very important one, the control families, that's very, very important, and actually I personally like to get a little too specific into that for the sake of really just diving into the weeds and understanding and the differences between the actual controls. Because again, we have to actually go move mountains with this stuff. So knowing the control families and how to apply them, that's huge. Government laws and regulations, what verbiage is spoken from what document, that's that. And then the risk management framework. Next to framework, I want you to write this down. Write down ice cube tray. Why do you think I want you to write that down?
Remember for test.
No, not at all. I want you to remember it because an ice cube tray is a framework. It holds things. Right? You can substitute things out and replace things. Like ice cubes, right? You take them out and serve them. So you can take a lot of these documents and you can basically, they're frameworks. So there's a risk management framework or framework. You can look at the different risk components or the different ice cubes, if you will. So whenever you see the word framework, think frameworks hold things together, like ice cubes, or standards, for example. And then, of course, some of the interagency reports. All right. When it comes to government laws and regulations, you can go ahead and highlight these. You got the FDCC standard, you have the OMB, the M series documents. I actually reference those quite a bit, knowing which one's what, which one does what. FISMA, Federal Information Security Management Act, OMB A130. And I can actually, and there's actually HSPD 12, for example, which is just Homeland Security Presidential Directives. We'll look at what even how the naming convention of Homeland Security Presidential directives has evolved over the years, and what the purposes of them are. Most of this can be captured in the beginning of each of the federal documents. You get to an introductory paragraph, we'll go